you don't know us, we're an architectural practice of about 160 employees worldwide. We've got our 2 studios in the UK, and 2 in Australia and 1 in Toronto. We've been established for over 30 years. We specialise in architecture, placemaking, and master planning, with an emphasis on rail and infrastructure, but also on residential mixed use and aviation. Part of our ambition, which I think is a key for everybody at this moment in time, is shaping cities for a sustainable future. And I'm sure some of the presentations you'll be hearing about today will be touching on that. How do we do it? Well, as a company, we are natural collaborators. We're always keen to talk, but perhaps more importantly, we want to listen and understand. And it's this collaborative approach that we've closely worked with everybody involved, such as clients, stakeholders, colleagues and end users, which has happened over the last 30 years and which we're continuing to nurture. Sorry, Adam's doing my slide moving, so I'm a bit, we've got him. And then finally, so what is the Generator Group? So Generator Group was established last year, and it's a series of events that we host throughout the year. Usually, well, in the past, it's been in our London studio. In the future, we want it to be in our Manchester studio, however, recently online due to the current pandemic. But why was it established? So the aim of the group is to help integrate people of all ages, backgrounds, and different experiences into design and the wider context of the industry, as well as spark thought-provoking debate about topics that are not currently being explored. We hope to recognise opportunities to link with emerging industries and contacts and establish foundations for future projects and projects teams. As a mixed gender and nationality group, that is the aim, and that's what we want to continue to foster throughout the next few years. We all realise that we've got individual specialisms, and we hope to challenge the perceptions of the industry. The people will be speaking have a specialism in infrastructure, regeneration and placemaking, but are looking to extend that to a wider audience and are receptive to innovative ideas. So that's a little bit of background as to who we are and why we do it. I'm going to pass over to Adam. Adam is an architect who has been at Western Midlands for about 5 years now. He'll be leading the event today. He'll be introducing all of the speakers and also doing the Q&A at the end. And I suppose I should probably introduce myself. My name's Samantha Dean. I'm a senior associate at Western Midlands and Partners, and I've recently been tasked with overseeing the new Manchester studio. So for those of you in the north of England, I'm sure you'll be seeing a lot more of me in the future. Over to you, Adam.
Cheers, Sam. Right, I just want to get some housekeeping rules out of the way before we crack on with the presentation. So as Sam says, we're going to be holding the Q&A session at the end. So if you can put any questions that you've got throughout the presentations in the chat box, and if you can please put your name, your organisation, and who you want to direct the question at, and which presentation it is in the comment itself. If you can just make sure that the comments are directed at me, Adam Brown, so they don't disturb anybody presenting as well. That'd be great. Also, just to let you all know, we will be recording this so that people who can't attend today can watch it later. So just make you all aware of that. Okay, right, let's kick off the first presentation. So I'd like to welcome our first speaker, Stephen O'Malley from Civic Engineers. Stephen is a co-founding director of Civic Engineers. The skills Stephen has developed to engineer healthy, active and attractive urban neighbourhoods abroad: civil, transport, highways, flood risk, drainage, utilities, structure, ground remediation engineering. Stephen's fusion and practice of these skills enables the creation of inspirational public spaces that have a positive impact on the environment and enable people to live healthier and happier lives. This broader, more creative, collaborative approach has seen Stephen recognised as an industry expert in his field. Stephen has recently been appointed as the High Streets Task Force expert, and he's also on the New London Architecture Panel for Wellbeing. So, Stephen, if you want to kick us off today.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Adam. Hopefully I can do some justice to those terms. And thanks very much for inviting me along this afternoon or early evening. So hopefully my screen is shared. Everybody see that? Yes? Yeah, fab. So unlocking the north, quite a challenge, particularly at the moment when we seem to be actually going in reverse, getting locked down with tier 3 announced today. But nevertheless, looking beyond the immediacy of the pandemic, and in the hope that the vaccine, in Boris Johnson's own words, is going to be the cavalry that comes to save us in the near future. Very briefly, with regards to civic engineers, there's about 100 of us in 4 locations: London, Manchester, Leeds and Glasgow. And without repeating some of the points that Adam's already made, our interests are very broad in terms of the engineering that we do, but civil, structural, transport are the 3 core strands. We contend that technical excellence is at the heart of that, but what we do, or what distinguishes the way we want to practice, is that we apply that with a high degree of emotional intelligence and bring a much more nuanced experiential quality to what that means as being an engineer. Economics being the sort of driver for a lot of these decisions, particularly in the context of the topic this evening. And there's this lady, Kate Rayworth, you may have come across her, who's been introducing an increasingly adopted philosophy of donut economics, the principle being that the outer radius of the donut represents the finite limitations of our planet, and the inner radius of the donut representing the social floor, the limit below which society shouldn't have to exist, the sort of $3 a day existence that some of our fellow planetary citizens have got to experience. And the space that operates between those 2 parameters is an area where we can thrive. And this is a direct challenge to some of the conventional economics that we've been dealing with, not least of which is GDP, which is the exponential growth, which clearly runs into the confines of the limitations of our planet, and has been partly, if not substantially, one of the reasons why we find ourselves in this position. And why does that matter? I think what we're finding as a society is actually these metrics and these values are becoming increasingly commercially recognized. Environmental, social and governance, ESG, and this headline from the Financial Times in recent days, just pointing out that a number of funds that operate on these principles will exceed conventional funds by 2025. Also interesting in the context of the machinations of the recent American election and Joe Biden's proper re-engagement with climate change and green jobs and his pursuit of a green economy. It's $2 trillion, and he seems to have appointed to the investment in these changes over the coming period. It's going to be really fascinating to see what the American economy manages to wrangle and to change and to influence. But I think we've already seen some of the ramifications of that as early indicators of what's to come. But actually, to pick up on the points that I'd like to make more broadly, I'd like to go back to the 1960s slightly oddly, but this slide here showing a picture of the Right Honourable Ernest Marples in the top right-hand corner, a Mancunian as it happens, but he was the Minister for Transport during this period, and he was responsible for commissioning 2 key reports. The Beeching report, there's a picture of Mr. Beeching in the bottom right, undertook to try and modernise the railway networks. I think it's fair to say that the infrastructure across the country at this time was pretty wrecked after the war, and there was a strategic point at which Mr. Marples guided our society to pursue one that was more focused on highways and not so much on alternative means. And that has had an impact on spatial planning, which was captured in Traffic in Towns, a second document here, the author of which was Colin Buchanan, and he was advocating the principle of segregation. And this image here at the bottom of this sheet with this green rather large car in this space, demonstrating how movement would take place within the ground plane and human activity would take place suspended above. And I think that principle has stuck with us for the last 60 years and has led to a whole series of decisions and choices which has put cars at the center of how we move and operate, particularly in parts of Manchester, more broadly Manchester City region, with sort of siloed services, amenities, facilities, whether that's housing estates or big box supermarkets, out-of-town shopping centres or business parks. And the only way to get meaningfully or easily or straightforwardly from one to the other is by using a car. Remarkable graph this, the billions of miles per year shown on the vertical axis here from 1949, immediately after the war, and the blue vertical axis here representing 1960, the point at which Ernest Marples was exercising some of these decisions and influence, and the deterioration of the number of billions of miles per year being cycled over that period. This is a picture from 1957 from a book by Karen Cliff, sorry, just on my desk here, which is why I was peering across. And you know, it is remarkable that cycling is not a new phenomenon. Cycling was actually a utilitarian choice, a very practical choice for many in Manchester and elsewhere, right the way across the UK during this period, and something that we seem to have forgotten, which I think picks up on the point of culture, which I'll come back to in a moment, which has left us with these very stark conduits of streets right the way across our urban settlements and beyond, and this rather simplistic silhouette just giving an indication as to how that space in the ground plane is allocated to those uses, with the dominant use being allocated to vehicles. Go back to the point about culture, because what's reinforced with those choices is this wider public health campaign. I suspect by the fashions here on the left, this is somewhere from maybe from the 80s. One false move and you're dead, or even this bottom right-hand cartoon here. Be sure that children know how dangerous traffic can be. Roads are for cars and lorries, not for pedestrians. And then we ram these roads right through the heart of our urban settlements and expect society to cling on to the margins. And that's the top image there. The jeopardy of crossing the road, the equivalent to trying to cross a major chasm on a rather flaky looking plank. It is also interesting how quickly culture and society can change, because the smoking ban is only actually in place since 2007. And I think for many of us, the very idea that somebody might choose to smoke in a public space indoors is quite alien. And yet this image and this was a reality only 13 years ago. So it is entirely possible and inevitable that society does evolve and change and shift, and our views on those things will respond to the conditions that we're confronted with. Some of those other issues with regards to public health, obesity, high blood pressure and so on, a direct result of the sedentary lifestyles that we then are forced to have. If we can't have and integrate activity straightforwardly in our everyday choices, we end up with these rather limited opportunities to seek exercise, and what is attracted by that, or what's a consequence of that, are some of these negative public health implications. And what we're interested in, this diagram is from Hank Dietmar, which I like the simplicity of, and the bottom half now revealed is much more sophisticated neighborhood, predicated on the principles of a compact neighborhood or a 20-minute neighborhood. 15-20-minute neighborhoods gets bandied around a lot at the moment. I mean, it doesn't really matter. I think the key point here is that what we're talking about is trying to access a significantly larger number of services, amenities and facilities within a shorter distance of where we live, and reducing the need to actually travel from the get-go. And then the means by which we travel is by active travel choices, positive choices, the experience along those routes and options being much more beneficial to us as a society for a whole raft of reasons. I made reference to the point about the competition for space in the ground plane. A large part of that is a function of speed. Apologies for the distorted graphic of that image on the right-hand side there. This is taken from Manual for Streets. It is showing the relationship between forward visibility, lane width, and vehicle speed. And convention has been about offering up generous sight lines and comfortable highway dimensions to reduce accidents, when actually, in reality, it's the converse that is true. The tighter, more confined space vehicles are offered, the less accidents we're likely to occur, certainly speed and severity of those accidents. Some of the qualities that we then want to try and embed and hardwire into our streets and spaces is proper, decent, direct door-to-door cycling infrastructure, public transport facilities and services, not just the services themselves, which are obviously critical, but also the waiting environment, what bus stop environments are like, and the intelligence and frequency of information and ease of access, the vitality of our streets, seeking to have much more sociable streets and street life, the opportunity for incidental and casual play on the way, and climate resilience, the meaningful incorporation of blue and green infrastructure in the form of SUDs, dealing with amenity, biodiversity, as well as quality of water and water volume. The vulnerability of pedestrians, particularly children in these environments, and not just children, but some of those other members of our society who do feel marginalized and disenfranchised as a result of some physical or mental impairment, that makes their ability to navigate through our cities more challenging when they want to live and should live and can live and could live independent lives if our infrastructure was better designed. Cycling is regularly regarded as an elite sport or a dedicated sort of pastime, and I think the stats bear it out, with sort of 70% of cyclists in the main being middle-aged men. But this organisation based in London, Wheels for Wellbeing, have shown that actually this broader constituency of people, some of whom are either elderly or have some of the forms of physical or mental impairment, with adapted bikes can live much more independent lifestyles without having to interact with public transport and some of the challenges that presents with step-free access and other things. And hearing these guys speak is very inspiring. The climate in the UK is also regarded as an impediment to making these choices, yet we know that there's very successful societies in the not too distant Europe. These are the hardy Copenhageners cycling through all sorts of weather conditions. This graph here, Copenhagen being on the blue histogram, red histogram, and Glasgow represented by the blue bar on these histograms. And you can see over the course of the seasons, there's very little difference climatically between those two cities, and Manchester would fall into a similar sort of category. I'm really fascinated by this research, the pleasure metric from W.S. Morris and P.A. Hancock from 2013. The idea of applied ergonomics, the stimulation, the human mind desiring or seeking out stimulation once every 4 seconds. And I think that vitality on the street is going to, if we can create the interaction between the building, a door, a window, blurring the line between the building and the adjacent enclosure and the space, to create this vitality and self-perpetuating driving of activity through the streets. And this then offers up a much more potential for a much more sophisticated streetscape. The incorporation of SUDs, natural landscapes, the absorption of water, and some of that released back into the air through evapotranspiration, but a large portion of it being subsumed or infiltrated into underlying soils, so replicating natural geographic processes, and the systems that we now have in our cities, actually accelerating water across the surfaces and through the networks to cause flooding at bottlenecks, wherever that might be. These images are actually from Altrincham in South Manchester, as recently as last year. Fairly shocking images. Water, as we find weather patterns shifting, these events are more likely to become more frequent. Climate more broadly, clearly, this is one of the points I was making at the start of this conversation about the importance of adapting to our climate and doing that in a job-friendly way. The role of the car in that is clearly, at this point in time, certainly before technology is rapidly changing. So some of these metrics are in a state of flux, but some of the basic things about, this is from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, but the average European car has 5 seats but carries 1.5 people per trip. And the typical European car park, 92% of time, just incredible. Now, whether we optimize that in a sort of a totally utilized Uber-like fashion with autonomous vehicles in the fullness of time, there's still an argument as to how much space those vehicles take up in our precious urban environments. The future of freight distribution and the ranges and range of these types of vehicles, being able to offer up that choice and freedom for last mile deliveries, and a range of different types of businesses that might avail of those choices for freight consolidation centers and wider distribution. Social inclusion, there is a massive democratization of these choices. If you think of the amount of cost involved in maintaining a car, a large portion of our societies and communities don't own a car in some parts of Manchester and Greater Manchester, and are excluded on that basis, access to jobs and other things. And some of the metrics that spin out of the choices of infrastructure investment are related to the public health that I've touched on already, but also wider issues about access to jobs. Walking and cycling is a low cost entry choice, and providing greater walking and cycling infrastructure into our communities provides greater range for a larger number of our fellow citizens to be able to access a wider range of services. This NHS Trust, Guy's and St Thomas's in London, choosing to invest in low traffic neighbourhoods £250,000 of their budget they're spending on these interventions in an attempt to try and prevent the need for medical attention rather than dealing with the problem in a response to an issue that's been presented to them. They can try and deal with it beforehand. And I know that low traffic neighborhoods have been contentious. So it's difficult to unwind 60 years of infrastructure choices in 6 months, even though the empirical data that's generated as a result of those low traffic neighborhoods is really valuable. And some of those are working and some of them are not. But we also need to look at the siting and location of services and facilities within those neighborhoods. I am bringing this back to Manchester here with some key documents that are prevailing with regards to these choices. The B-Lines has been established for a number of years and coming forward piecemeal. There's also the Trafford Design Guide, which is an interesting piece of work setting out some 20-minute neighbourhood principles and the ordering of the infrastructure to deliver against that agenda. And then the city centre transport strategy for 2040. Key quality of that aspiration there being I mean, what's shown here in that graph from that study or from that transport strategy is that rail will look to pick up do the heavy lifting there for the majority of public transport. Car use reducing from 22,400 at the moment in 2019 down to 15,800. So, you know, approximately a third of that traffic being reduced over the coming 20 years. You could argue that walking and cycling should represent a larger portion here. So I do think that's a little bit modest in terms of the potential for change in my view. This is the infrastructure that we're currently confronted with in Manchester. This is Great Ancoats Street, you know, typical of infrastructure right the way across the UK in many respects, Glasgow and other places included. And this is one alternative interpretation of that space, offering up a much richer environment and dealing with a whole raft of those problems and symptoms simultaneously in terms of incorporation of green infrastructure, biodiversity, access to nature, dealing with public health, wellness, but also just the overall environmental quality, this holistic approach to the whole street, building line to building line, those ground floor uses, it creates a much better, richer experience. I did mention Glasgow, and Glasgow's got hosting COP26 next year. We've been appointed, and I've been working in Glasgow for the last 3 years on the Avenues project at these 16 streets across the centre of the city. For those that may recognise Glasgow on this image, the M8 wraps around the west and north, and the River Clyde is that blue band at the south. And you can see it's 16 of these core streets right the way across the city centre, the equivalent to a dozen Dean's Gates in Manchester language. Predicated on really positive things, but universal to a certain extent, improving connectivity, city image, city economy, redevelopment, enhancing and protecting the environment. Unsurprisingly, a project of this scale in this location involves a significant number of stakeholders, and I've had the genuine privilege of meeting with thousands of Glaswegians over the last 3 years to understand their concerns and to incorporate their interests into the plan, not least of whom have been the Glasgow Disability Alliance and Glasgow's own sensory impairment unit, and making sure that the interests of these people are properly incorporated into the streets. Bringing officers along on that journey and other statutory stakeholders, the Scottish equivalent to the Environment Agency and others, a series of study trips and learning and sharing programs. This is a delegation from Glasgow in Manchester, as it happens, looking at cycling infrastructure and meeting with their peers to discuss the issues face to face. Applying some of this then into the streets themselves. This is the Victorian map of Glasgow, and you can see the fine-grained network of streets right the way across this part of the plan. This yellow line represents what is one of the avenues in the plan coming forward now, which is named the Underline, which is represented again here in the same place. However, in this picture, this aerial photograph, the M8 has landed like a spaceship and caused a huge degree of severance to all those little arteries and veins that had previously connected those neighbourhoods in the northwest back into the city centre, dramatically increasing the perceived distance for those communities to be able to walk and cycle into the, and physically limiting the opportunity for people to walk and cycle into the city centre. This is the environment that's there at the moment, very hostile, quite dangerous, quite intimidating. This is the proposal to cut through with a very direct, clear, at-grade axis, reinstating those connections and lining and framing these views with green infrastructure to deal with the climate adaptation point. In this image here, this is this really attractive historic building with the Glasgow School of Art wrapped around to the back and left. You can just about make out through the trees there the M8 on the viaduct. And this is the land swap deal that needs to occur to allow that route to be reconnected, but creating a much better setting for that building and the opportunity for lots of other public life to take place. One final image here on Glasgow. This is Argyle Street with Glasgow Central Station straddling the street in the background of this picture. A fundamental reordering of space, limiting the amount of vehicular space within the plan, meaningful incorporation of segregated cycling and green infrastructure within it. I do want to finish very quickly on Trafford, bring you back to Manchester and 20-minute neighbourhood principles. Within that, there's a hierarchy of streets that's coming forward as part of the design guide, with a range of different streets applied to, in this case, Altrincham, showing how there's a gradation of shifting emphasis from place to movement, or rather from movement to place, as you move through that hierarchy, with the top of that being a local street for shopping or school zones, town square, town centre street. And I want to draw particular attention to this arrangement here. This is actually a Dutch street based on the Fiatstraat model, where the auto de gas, so cars are still permitted into these spaces, but they are feel very subordinate if anybody's been on any of these streets, of which there's many across different cities in Holland. And we've applied some of that logic to Stamford New Road in Altrincham in the first phase of the public realm works that have been delivered there. This is an image of Altrincham, Stamford New Road, probably about 2014, 2013. And this is a more recent picture, pre-COVID, probably last summer, maybe the summer before. And you can recognize the central rib, the tightening of the geometry, the regular at-grade pedestrian crossings down along the length of the street, parking bays, loading bays at pavement level. There's a whole variety of these techniques and tweaks that in combination, in concert, working together, fundamentally change the whole experiential quality of pedestrians and businesses that interact and had use of this street. Further work to occur in the next phase, which we're currently working on, dealing with the junctions down along the length of the route. So, Adam, I hope I'm on reasonable time there.
Yeah, I think that was great. Thanks for that. I think you're just about on time, so that was good. Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think to sort of see how ring roads and things like that really just create severance through a city and actually break up just how development kind of occurs and how people kind of use that city is just an incredible kind of thing that we need to resolve. So I think it's a great start to the evening. So I'm just going to share my screen again. Apologies. Moving on to our next speaker, we've got Ben Jones from Buro Happold. So Ben is an associate sustainability engineer with 12 years experience in energy and building in the energy and building design sector. He's led multidisciplinary teams to deliver complex projects with a keen focus on low energy and sustainable design. So prior to joining Buro Happold, Ben spent 7 years at Arup in buildings groups based in London and Manchester, working as a building services engineer. But since joining Buro Happold, he's led the sustainability and physics group in Manchester, focused on delivering works in the energy sector as well as continuing works on sustainable building design. So Ben, if you'd like to share your screen.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. I'll give it a go. Okay, can you see that?
Yep.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks. I'm a resident of Altrincham, so I can attest to the quality of the Stamford New Road and Civic's work there, which is great. Yeah, so I'm Ben Jones, as Adam said. So I lead a small team of 5 of us in a sustainability team for Buro Happold up in Manchester. So I joined Buro Happold 6 years ago in Manchester. There were only 7 or 8 of us in Manchester at the time then, a few structures, a few M&E and a couple of sustainability. There's now 45 of us in Castlefield. So over the UK, there's maybe 1,000 of us between Bath, London, Manchester, Leeds, and Edinburgh. Yeah, so unlocking the north. I kind of took this as an opportunity to talk about a few specific projects that we've worked on over the past few years, and I've kind of tried to tie them together in a kind of fairly tenuous manner around what one could perceive as the strengths of the north. So first of all, the commercial sector, and I think the north has seen a kind of growing in strength in the commercial sector, and that kind of move of the kind of centre of gravity, if you like, away from London, particularly with the kind of the Channel 4s and the BBCs moving up north. The picture there around urban regeneration is Mayfield. So I'll talk a bit about that, as well as a little bit around, in fact, the Great Ancoat Street as well, which Stephen mentioned in his presentation. So a few ideas there around how we've regenerated these spots of Manchester and kind of brought them back to life. Second one, science and technology. Again, the north, particularly around the kind of universities, is in a kind of post-industrial world of the north of England, is kind of seems to be focusing on attracting the kind of science and technology sectors and the SMEs and the tech startups and whatnot. So I'll talk about a project that's very close to my heart, and I've worked on a lot in the past couple of years, which is the Alderley Park in Cheshire, which is the old AstraZeneca R&D research centre that Bruntwood bought a few years ago, and how we're effectively trying to decarbonise that and improve the public realm and the facilities. And then finally, industrial. So this is just a small piece of work, something we're just kind of touching on now, but a really interesting piece around how we can decarbonise the industry and the large industrial sites in the northwest. Yeah, so first of all, commercial. So this is a nice sketch of Mayfield. So we did this work kind of early doors with Studio Egret West. I guess where it is now is the kind of redeveloping the public realm, and the part that you can see, and consultants are designing the very top right hand side, the Resi Towers. So this is just a really nice example of how the whole development was really focused around the public realm. And despite the fact it was you and I, a private developer, they wanted to really focus it around the public realm and make that the kind of the early works package, if you like, rather than building a couple of buildings speculatively, see how they go, and then eventually you might build the whole lot. So it's that kind of focus on a kind of shared asset in the center of the development that was particularly important. And it's for those of you, sorry, who don't know where this is just out the back of Piccadilly Station. It's currently a kind of disused rail depot. So with HS2 potentially coming in at some point in Manchester, it's very kind of strategically important. It's kind of regenerating that whole entrance into Manchester. And as you come in, you can just see the rail tracks at the back of this sketch. You kind of be able to see some green space. So you know, Manchester is very lacking in terms of green and blue infrastructure. So it's trying to reintroduce some on the kind of doorstep of the city. So the whole thing was kind of focused around kind of revitalising the River Medlock, which is effectively hidden away in culverts, and there's high walls around it. So it's kind of invisible at the moment. It's full of shopping trolleys and God knows what. So it's about largely trying to redevelop that and bring it back to life and make it an asset. So a lot of it was around, and Stephen talked a lot about the kind of connectivity and the permeability of these spaces. This image kind of gives a good idea of the idea of this park, and a lot of these will be created. These walkways will be created by kind of boardwalks and decking and whatnot to allow people to really move through the space quite dynamically. And again, flooding and flood assessments is quite a key part of this. And effectively, the river that kind of 1 in 100 storm case, the river is allowed to flood, but the walkways are in such a position that that's a safe thing to happen. There's a large amount of suds and soft landscaping, as well as some attenuation tanks for some kind of drainage interventions. But it's really about trying to create a neighbourhood, and I guess it is, particularly now in terms of COVID, it's about trying to attract people into cities. You know, how are people going to want to live in kind of urban towers these days? You know, it's becoming a problem for cities. So the introduction of green and blue infrastructure in and around communities is becoming more and more important. So this is a bit of what we did kind of prior to that, which is looking at the regeneration framework around Piccadilly Station. So again, you can see the kind of the eventual realization of that Medlock Park is that it comes right under the a railway to the kind of northeast side of the railway as well, and that would be a huge transformation for the kind of entrance into Manchester. So this was a piece around the kind of external experience, making that pleasant, making the signage clear, making it a low stress environment. So trying to make it acoustically, air quality, high quality spaces. So that was one of the things that you and I kind of really focused on around the public realm, was making it high quality, and therefore hopefully in futures to come, people look after it and people love it, and therefore people it doesn't degrade over time because people are kind of emotionally invested in it. So this was, I mean, Stephen had a much better image of the Great Ancoats Street and what it might look like. This is a bit of early work again we did with Bennett's and Associates. So the sketches, the one on the top left there, the thick red line from left to right is the Great Ancoats Street, and this is where we were trying to draw exactly those kind of permeable, kind of reducing the dominance of the traffic and making that huge wide road a bit more permeable, a bit softer for bikes and for pedestrians. And again, I mean, in East Manchester, the blue infrastructure in the canals is a bit more evident, and so it's trying to utilize those where we can. And also I just want to touch upon the kind of circular economy piece that we kind of talking about. It's been a bit of a blind spot, I think, in the industry thus far around when we're talking about carbon. When you look at the carbon emissions of a construction of a building, is more than the rest of the 50 years in terms of the operational carbon emissions of the building. So largely been ignored to date. So the conversations that we're starting to have more with clients, if we get in early enough, is do you need to build a new building? Do you need to knock down this building? Can you refurbish and reuse the existing assets? Because that's the easiest and the cheapest and the quickest way to reduce the carbon emissions of a development. Yeah, so that was largely about trying to, I guess, revitalise and use sites and developments in the kind of urban environment. So this is the Alderley Park project. So as I mentioned, it used to be AstraZeneca's R&D headquarters. They sold it about 5 years ago to Bruntwood. They still occupy at least 3 of the buildings and will continue to for the foreseeable future, but it's owned now by Bruntwood, and has also got quite a large COVID testing facility there. So it's a kind of nationally important asset. And Bruntwood bought it with the idea of attracting, again, talking about that kind of post-industrial economy of the North, more the kind of science and technology startup type company. So what we kind of developed early on was some themes around how you'd draw out some KPIs and make this master plan as sustainable and as welcoming as possible around the natural resources. So we'll talk about how we've developed a kind of 30-40 year decarbonisation plan, mainly around heat provision. Sustainable travel, so we did quite a few studies around electric vehicle provision in the future, and that's quite interesting around here. How much are people, it's quite a rural area, so how much in the future are people going to want to charge at work, or are they going to charge at home? Natural capital, and again, similar to Mayfield, about reinvigorating. There's quite a large lake to which the development turns its back at the minute, so it's about opening that up. Resilience in terms of climate change, resilience, again, flood risk, and energy resilience, and some health and well-being aspects as well. So this is kind of, this diagram is a kind of culmination, I guess, of a couple of years work, really. So we've done kind of smaller studies on all these things here. So there are quite a few. So we assisted the architects in their master planning. So things around placemaking, the boardwalk across the mere, and promoting biodiversity, and things like a running track. So there's an ancient woodland at the top of around the mere there. So introducing a running track around that. So there are already some really amazing assets out in and around this campus. So it's about kind of promoting those, really. So energy was the kind of component that we focused on mostly. So so PV was one where we've highlighted where they could put solar panels, have a floating array on the mere, and most of the buildings are suitable for PV on the roof. So combine that with electric vehicle charging and battery storage. The most challenging aspect of this, trying to decarbonize such a kind of robust, almost kind of industrial campus like this, is provision of heat and steam. So currently they have a centralized energy center that produces water at 176 degrees, so it's very high temperature, and it's got a huge demand on it. So what we've developed is this kind of was it 30-year plan to kind of decarbonize the site. So this diagram on the right hand side was something we came up with to try and demonstrate how that phasing might work over that period. And on that graph, the kind of dark brown squares represent the current situation, where they've got a very high temperature network. And then the lighter brown and the yellow is phasing that into a lower temperature network with gas-fired CHP. So gas-fired CHP was used as a kind of revenue generator, if you like, to make the economics of switching to something that doesn't rely on fossil fuels viable. So over the period of 20-30 years, that becomes a revenue generator to switch to the green on the top right, which is effectively a heat pump led network served by ground source. So beneath, and in fact beneath a lot of the northwest, there's a sandstone aquifer about 100 meters down, so it's very suitable to open loop, so you can pour heat from beneath the aquifer and distribute it around the site, and have heat pumps in buildings elevating that temperature to what you need. So that basically becomes an all electric solution, and it removes your reliance on fossil fuels, which with a grid that is becoming increasingly clean, you'll become increasingly decarbonized. So we're kind of well on with this, and there's the Veolia are on site at the moment delivering the first phase of this scheme. So just a really kind of interesting study on a fairly kind of discrete campus about how you can decarbonize a kind of large existing asset. So finally, this is as I kind of mentioned, work that we've done a small piece on, really, with the local Energy Northwest hub, and it was largely a mapping piece to start to draw a roadmap for decarbonising industrial sites across the Northwest. So what we do is mapped the carbon emissions of these industrial sites, which is the map you can see on the right hand side, and that bright blob in the middle is around Ellesmere Port, where there's kind of a lot of chemical industry and steel and whatnot, and the kind of heavy industries. And the white squiggly boundary around it is the proposed hydrogen network, private hydrogen network called HyNet. That's the boundary of it. So it was just really interesting to kind of learn about, you know, hydrogen versus electric. You know, what is the answer to decarbonising sites, more urban sites, perhaps more suited to electrification. A heavy industry like this, you can't really do it with electricity. You have to. So there's no kind of. I think the conclusion that I came up with, there's no kind of golden bullet, if you like. It's going to be a mix of things. But I think the initial phases of the hydrogen network are going to rely on gas and the production of hydrogen from gas, which kind of, while it's effectively low carbon, it perpetuates the kind of fossil fuel industry. So I think the dream and the kind of vision, if you like, is to use the kind of large offshore wind capability, which there's already large offshore wind farms off the coast and northwest, and then you effectively have what they call green. You can generate green hydrogen, so you use that green electricity to produce hydrogen. And this is kind of the initial phase, is basically trying to put those pipes in the ground and trying to come up with some infrastructure that you can then move to something that's not reliant on gas and fossil fuels. So as part of this, we kind of picked a few specific sites. One of them I've picked because I worked on it more and I know more about it, is in city centre Manchester Science Park, which has got the Heineken brewery next to it in Hume. So that was quite an interesting opportunity. And opportunities like this have cropped up quite a lot in different cities, where you have large kind of waste heat loads in a city. So Heineken, I managed to sneak in there just before lockdown. Got a nice day out to a brewery, and they were already thinking about it. So they've already got about 5 or 6 megawatts of just heat that they reject to the atmosphere, and they've got quite ambitious carbon targets. So as soon as we mentioned there's a development happening next door that could probably use at least 2 or 3 megawatts of that, they were very excited by it, and I think there's an awful lot of these kind of untapped opportunities around cities. So yeah, so I think that kind of industrial thing is going to be a mix of kind of capturing waste heat opportunities, trying to get the makings of a kind of green hydrogen network going, as well as kind of electrification and use of waste heat. So I think that was it. This was just another diagram on Manchester Science Park. So I think that was it from me. Adam, I don't. How did I do for time?
Oh, not too bad actually. Yeah, cheers for that, Ben. That's great.
No worries.
Yeah, not too bad. I'm just going to stop you from sharing, and that's all right. Oh, there we go. Yeah, thanks for that. I think that's really interesting. I think looking at those sort of symbiotic relationships as well that you can find in cities is really quite an interesting point. I think when I was at uni in Nottingham, I was kind of we were looking at QMC, which is a big hospital, and how much waste energy they just toss away, and there's so many opportunities where you can actually make use of that and actually, you know, create this network, this green network that you talk about.
Yeah, Nottingham is actually one of the most interesting cities for energy, in terms of like the Robin Hood energy supplies and the networks and the social housing retrofits they've tried in Nottingham is interesting.
I think those were all the ones that we're kind of looking at combined together actually. Great, thanks for that, Ben. So moving on to our third speaker of the evening, we've got Giles Perkins from WSP. So Giles leads WSP's future mobility team in the UK and has over 30 years of experience in future transportation planning and intelligent transport sectors. He's worked in the public and private sector as a senior client and a director level consultant, and he's led major projects across all modes. He's a recognised expert in the field of future mobility and transport, having undertaken numerous cutting-edge commissions whereas insight is helping build future-ready thinking into strategies, policies, and asset specification. Giles has presented papers at numerous events and conferences in the UK, Europe, Japan, and Australia, focusing on the potential challenges and opportunities in the new future mobility space, with a focus on how we can navigate uncertainty. So Giles is a key contributor to WSP's New Mobility Now, and contributes to their ongoing international research program, as well as contributed to the government Office for Science and DFT roundtables on future mobility. So Giles, if you just want to share your screen.
Thank you, Adam. I'll try and share my screen. Just let me know when you can see that correctly. Is that okay?
Yep. See that,
super. Yeah, so I'm Giles Perkins. I'm grandly titled the Head of Future Mobility for WSP. I'm a Northerner, but I'm exiled down in Devon, so you're going to have to forgive me for that. The only thing that is constant is change. Greek philosophy quote here. And this really is at the heart, and we've heard it in the previous presentations about these changes that are ongoing around us and how we cope with change and how we navigate all this uncertainty. So if we think about the future, or if I think about the future of mobility, we use this iceberg diagram. So above the waterline, we've got the future, the bit that we can see. Under the waterline, we've got climate change, society change, our energy mix and needs. We've got the global trends that are influence us, the complete seismic change in terms of what's happening with retail and leisure, skills and education needs in the future, traveling or not, because we're not traveling today, so we don't get to have drinks and sandwiches afterwards, using digital access for a whole variety of things, healthcare, education, etc. And then we put technology and services at the bottom. And this is deliberate. We shouldn't be taking a view that technology leads us. We should be taking a view that we're actually trying to tackle all the things above in that giant iceberg. So what's changing? The future of mobility, the future of transport is defined by the Department for Transport with these 6 things in the center of this slide. Automation, the move towards autonomous vehicles ultimately. And that's ultimately. It's a long transition to get there, but there are automated solutions today. The automated shuttle that's been running around Salford campus, for instance, the trials that TFGM have been doing. Cleaner transport, the whole decarbonised piece, but not just car and van. Car, vans, HGVs, lorries, buses, trains, water taxis, trams, whatever else comes along. Cleaner transport in terms of tailpipe emissions, cleaner transport in terms of where the energy comes from. And I listened to a fascinating presentation this morning, Foreign and Commonwealth Office presentation over in Poland, where UK companies were talking about advances in electric bin trucks, bin wagons, which sounds very mundane, but the changes that it makes to air quality, noise, etc. is amazing. New business models, how we pay and consume things, in-app purchases, different companies coming to market with different things, new modes. So there's a helpful picture of a drone there. So drones are happening now. Chemotherapy is being delivered from hospitals in Portsmouth and Southampton over to the Isle of Wight because it's the best and safest way to deliver those critical drugs. Data and connectivity, the golden thread that goes through everything, and changing attitudes, what we think about. Now we've put a 7th one on here, the bottom right, aggregation, joining things together into places to do things better, and I'll come on to what that means. But what's really important, especially kind of thinking about anywhere, think about the GM context, we always get excited about the city, but we have all these peri-urban and rural places that wrap around the city. So yesterday, the department produced a call for evidence for the future of rural transport. And this is really important because those rural places, those edge of city places have energy problems, they have digital problems, they have sparse services, etc. So how do we navigate uncertainty? So this very cluttered diagram that we've put together here, on the bottom, time, we're trying to get towards net zero carbon. On the y-axis, number of motor vehicles. And what we're saying here, let's stop planning for vehicles, let's start planning for people and planning for places. Now, what that does, coupling this with a customer-centric approach to planning, putting the human at the center, means we start to bring overall vehicle numbers down. We start to improve the utilization of vehicles. We start to improve health and reduce accidents, etc. And taking a place-led approach means we can do the things that previous presenters have talked about in terms of delivering better places. So on the top line here, you've got worst case scenario. Bottom line here, you've got a better scenario. So how do we do that in this really uncertain market when all the technologists and everything are promising us all this shiny tech that's going to save us? Well, we need to get the basics right before we start getting excited about the Jetsons. So you've heard me use this phrase mobility versus the traditional phrase of transport. And this is important because we regard mobility as being feet, wheels, and digital. And this is really important. This is sometimes using digital as we're doing now, sometimes using feet, sometimes using things with wheels, rather than just the traditional debate, which has been the wheels on the bus, the wheels on the train, the wheels on the car, etc. Now, this is vital when we can consider what's happened over recent years. So traditionally, we would get in vehicles or we would ride our bikes or walk to go to places to do stuff and buy stuff, whether that was having food and drink, whether it's going to the bank, whether it was retail, whether it's healthcare, going to the cinema, etc. Now, increasingly and accelerated by the pandemic, but really set in train 20 odd years ago with the arrival of the internet, goods and services are coming to people. So that's either through digital means or actually physical services coming to people. And this is important. So we've got the digital piece or the wheels bringing goods and services to people. So we've now got this blend of a two-way flow. And this is critical in considering what the future of mobility is. Now, what's vital is taking an evidential approach. So I've rather flippantly put a patent of a flying car up here versus the reality of what we're dealing with. And we are in the most volatile period that transport's probably seen for 40 or 50 years. We've got the Green Recovery Plan. We've got the ban on petrol and diesel new vehicles in 2030. We've got e-scooters on the streets of many places in the UK. We've got the future transport zones that are innovating. We've got electric car hubs being built and just over the hill, and we've got the same in Manchester. You've got the same in Manchester. You've got cargo bikes on the streets delivering things in different ways. So the reality is that lots of these little things are happening. So this change is occurring, but not in the same way everywhere. And how do we anticipate change? So we look at it as signals, trends, and trajectories. The signals are the little blips that you might see on the radar, the early indications of something that might become a reality downstream. So we've got on here drones, we've got Hyperloop, if you subscribe to that model, and you've got flying taxis. Lots of people talking about it, lots of venture capital going into these things, but no real commercial case yet, but a lot of money being poured into it. Then we've got trends, the observable changes. So automated shuttles, mobility hubs, hydrogen fuel cells, connected vehicles, and the whole rural agenda are things that are happening now. There are deployments, but it's not commercially at scale. Then we've got trajectories when things are becoming stable, car sharing, Uber, electric vehicles, demand responsive bus, e-bikes, e-scooters, cargo bikes. When things are becoming stable and more visible, leading us to, on the right, a new business as usual. And this is really challenging because a bunch of us like to get excited about things. Lots of us grew up playing with Lego, and I'm sure architecture colleagues had Lego or Meccano if you're of a certain age. You know, we like building things, we like doing exciting things, but we have to be grounded in what will be a reality. So that time piece at the bottom, the commercial, technical, and operational maturity is key. Just because something exists doesn't mean it'll be successful. So I was really harmed to hear in the previous presentations, people, activity, and place are central. So our approach is when we look at anything, and we're doing master planning, we're doing all sorts of things, that we take a segmented approach to the people. We're looking at the young, the aging, life stages and events, so the arrival of the first child, retiring. We're looking at the intersection of gender orientation and ethnicity, because that means things to people in how they use transport and places. The socially and financially excluded. So there's 1 million people in the UK that still don't have a bank account. There are millions of people who aren't digitally savvy, yet the technologists promise us a digitally enabled app-driven future. The disabled, hidden and visible disabilities, and then the differences between us all in wider society. And we think about the places, retail and leisure, healthcare, workplace and employment, education and learning, and really importantly, how the deliveries and logistics allow all of those things to happen. The forgotten piece in the transport equation, the dirty thing that no one wants to talk about, the trucks and the lorries delivering all the stuff we consume, absolutely vital. And then the urban, the peri-urban and the rural, because the difference between those are vast. And what we're trying to achieve, what we're all trying to achieve, friendlier, greener, happier, healthy, productive, prosperous, quieter and safer, everything, outcomes. This is key. So this is tying transport and mobility to a set of outcomes. This isn't tying transport to autonomous vehicles will solve everything. We're saying, how do we get to outcomes? So we summarize this as people, place and activity, the underlying energy, the digital backbones, and access in whatever form that is. So this is the new template to think about how mobility serves place, how it serves cities. And as mentioned before, Transport for Greater Manchester, one of the first to come forward with their 2040 strategy, has these sorts of concepts. The work that we've done for Transport for the North on their early work on corridors, further work that we've done on scenarios has this thinking at its heart. So here's some case studies which I'll rattle through very, very quickly. Move to electrification. Somerset electric vehicle strategy is an example where we are now modeling what's going to happen in the future, what the uptake is, and what that means at a very granular level in different places. What's the share of vehicles going to be? What's the infrastructure that's going to support? What are the commercial models around it? Who should be doing what? Who should be specifying what? Fascinating stuff. But it's just for cars and vans. We are doing fleet work, we're doing due diligence work, doing lots of work in freight and bus. Facilitating new mobility solutions. So we aided Kent in their e-scooter competition. Very rapid, month-long progress to get from a blank sheet of paper to getting somebody awarded. Doing the diligence to make sure that that micro-mobility solution as part of those trials meets the needs of the people in Canterbury. And this is the key thing, looking at the needs of the people in the place, not looking at the technology. Planning for people, place and activity. We've reviewed the local transport plan down in Warwickshire. We're doing similar in other places. Rather than setting up a plan that looks at what's your bus strategy or rail strategy, we've said what's your people strategy and what's your place strategy. So how do we tie the needs of people and places to the local transport plan so it is meaningful and allows change to happen with regards to the flexing of modes and all these sorts of things. Aggregating functions, modes and services together. So in the Midlands, we've done a huge piece of work on hubs, community hubs, mobility hubs, healthcare, every conceivable use case and how you route them together. And here's a concept we've done for a towns bid where a mobility hub has got a travel centre, it's got co-working space, it's got cafe, it's the centre of the community, but it's got multi-function and it's using space very, very differently. So this could be redundant assets, it could be repurposed assets, invigorating the high street or a district centre in a very different way. And we're developing the places of the future. So Otterpool down in Kent, Garden Village proposal, and we're doing it over countless other garden villages elsewhere, embedding future mobility interventions, embedding those energy interventions from day one, baking it in, and then having monitoring and evaluation to so allow us to do vision and validate, to be really visionary in what we're doing, test those in the first phase, learn from it, roll it out, but really flipping that so that the human is at the center of it. It's not the car, that it's about quality of life. Decarbonising transport more generally. This is in the West Midlands as part of their future transport zone, looking at the needs of people for shopping, delivery, business, all sorts of functions, and looking at the vast number of operators out there, and then how we match trips to needs and how we decarbonise them. So this is the first one to really go into the deep dive of looking at all functions and all use cases and looking at the applicability and how they can be met. We also consider the future form, function and value of assets. So this is just a generic shopping centre or retail centre in anywhere. It could be, think of anyone and it could look like this. So this is major asset owners, confidential one in the UK, another one in Europe, billions of pounds and euros of assets, advising them on the types of people that will be going to those places for the types of functions. So if retail's gone to resi or there's more leisure in it, what that means for transport, how people get there, hours of operation, logistics, everything, to rethink the form and function, and importantly, the value of those assets and how transport can serve them. And lastly, developing the frameworks for the future. So we are leading on the first future mobility strategy for the Southeast at the moment, which I know is a long way away, but similar thinking has been fed into transport for the North, work earlier late last year. In developing a future mobility strategy that sets the conditions for success. And this is important, allowing creativity, allowing that commercial response, but firmly tying it to people and place, reducing vehicles, delivering better outcomes. So what are the benefits of taking this kind of more human-centric approach, segmenting what people do, life stages, all those sorts of things? Well, it provides an evidential approach to inform policy and strategy and programs, etc. It tailors interventions to identifiable markets, and this is key. This is taking a more of a commercial approach to transportation than a predict and provide. It helps reduce the impact of risky solutions and redundant assets. It takes this retail-led approach to transport, so it's more John Lewis than Bert's buses, if you like, trying to work out who the customers are, what their needs are, and how you react to it. It helps create the conditions for success. It aids local engagement and understanding because it anchors it in the needs of places, and it identifies potential markets and reduces the chances of failure. And importantly, it's wrapped around this vision and validate approach. So if you think about any of the developments that we've heard about so far, I would kind of go into those and say, right, well, what's the human-centric approach? Who are the customers going to be there in the future? How do we identify those? And we've done rafts of work of linking together kind of visioning, looking at segmentation of those markets using consumer data, and then even going out and validating that through extensive surveys. So let's change the way we think and let's create change. And that's me. Thank you.
Thanks, Giles. That was great. I think it's a really interesting take. And it says, you know, you're looking at what it's actually providing, socioeconomic value and all that kind of thing, rather than just looking at the transport technology and you know what you can do just because you can. And I think it's a really interesting sort of thesis approach. I think it's a great way of approaching things. Okay, our next speaker. I'm just going to share my screen once more. So on to our final speaker of the night. We've got Kevin Flynn from CPC. So Kevin heads up the Transport and Infrastructure Services and Development in the North at CPC. His background's in industrial design and delivery, which has allowed him to develop his contract, commercial, procurement and project management expertise. So Kevin, if you want to share your screen.
Oh, there we go. Can you see that, Adam? Is that okay?
Not quite yet.
No good.
Not yet. Fine, share it from mine. That's okay. Maybe just.
How's that?
There we go. Perfect.
Sorry about the jittery start. And Adam, before I start, I can confirm I won't be asking you how I did for time at the end of my presentation. Good evening, everyone. As I say, my name is Kevin Flynn, and I am a project director for CPC Project Services. So CPC, you may or may not be aware of us. We are a small to, well, the larger end scale of an SME, circa 220 staff across 7 offices across the UK. And just as Adam briefly said, first just starting with myself, I originated from an oil rig many years ago. So my time as an electrician, spent 7 years in petrochem design, and then 7 years in building services design. moving into contract and procurement, and in 2019 decided to try my chance at academia and graduated with an MSc in construction law. So I'm very much at the delivery end of the varying processes and great schemes you guys and concepts you guys are talking about. So probably coming at this from a different perspective. So CPC, just as a brief overview, established 1990, really specialist in program and project management and cost and commercial management. As I said, we're 7 offices across the UK, and principally working quite significantly in transport and infrastructure projects. Just at the moment, as a bit of an example, we're just working on the £600 million 4-line modernisation programme down for TfL in London, and also the bank station development, which is the oversight development, which is circa £400 million. So providing project and programme and cost advice and controlling down there. So taking Adam's title when he first asked me to present this evening of Unlocking the North, he said it was a thesis type event. So I approached it from a different perspective from the presentations that have just been given. I mean, we're all aware of the glossy title of Unlocking the North, and the great and the good across our region have spoken long and hard and in depth, and so sometimes not so in depth, of what Unlocking the North is. And I think it's fair to say it's probably one of those topics that's kept most of the sandwich suppliers across the region in heavy demand on varying aspects of presentations and seminars. So what I've just tried to do is just look at it from a different perspective. I mean, and please bear with me with my humble background. So if we just approach what is, I mean, who holds the key to unlocking the North, and do we actually need a key? When we look at the North, just in terms of stats, I mean, we've got an economy of circa £289 billion against a population of about 15.1 million people. We have circa 400,000 students across 23 universities, and we have over 1 million businesses in the North, and we import roughly 19% of the UK GDP. And believe it or not, export about 59 billion in goods. So looking at these headlines, I mean, the first question you could ask is, what are we unlocking it from? But in essence, the common denominator that links all of this together is our transport and infrastructure, which I think we can all see by us using it and seeing the impacts of it, is not. We need a cohesive and efficient transport and infrastructure that not only reflects and serves the North where we are at present, but serves the North in developing where we know it can be. And picking up on some of the presentations from earlier, incorporating obviously the great ideas and the schemes that are being tested and tried at the moment. It's a challenge for all of us. So I came at this now from really the perspective of, what do we do in our industry, as we're talking about, as me from a deliverer, who we turn projects into schemes, and schemes into bricks and mortar, basically. And in essence, we always require 3 fundamental components in all that we do. Between most people, presumably on this evening, we design, we engineer, we plan, we cost, and we build things. But we do require 3 fundamental things. We need and representation. We need the funds, and we also need some form of delivery model. So even all the concepts that have been spoken about this evening, as they transpire into delivery, it needs a model under which they need to be, or can be at least, delivered. So at the moment, in terms of representation and need, we know we have the representation just quite ably, with 2 significant bodies representing the North in obviously the Northern Powerhouse and Transport for the North. I mean, they represent ourselves at the north at the highest levels in the land, that they are presenting the need and the potential. And I think in fairness, they are ready to listen and learn. And the need, I mean, we can define the need. We from our perspective anyway, we see varying schemes and projects on our radars, from upgrade of the Transpennine route, various road schemes. We've got major station redevelopments and even new builds, and to housing developments, town centre developments, and the environmental requirements that obviously support and embrace those. And fundamentally, anyone travelling across the Pennines, be it in road or rail, you see that the trauma that can actually present. So we've got the need and we've got the representation. So the funds, the funding, it is available in various stages and varying bodies, from central government departments to the local, regional and combined authorities. We can see commitments of funding and indeed funds already given and in various amounts, and are presently sat in various stages of expenditure. So we've got that available to us as well. So next we come on to the delivery model. And in terms of unlocking the north, is this where we hold the key? As all our organisations, the people that have been speaking this evening and whoever's listening, we all form a composite part of the north, in terms of our presence, in terms of our delivery, in terms of what we do and what we design, and the legacies that we leave behind. But if we can't start to look at it from an industry perspective, then we may not be giving the north the true legacy that we should all leave it, really. So if we take that into a singular perspective, we can look at the north both inwards and outwards. If we look at ourselves inwardly, that would be a whole debate, and probably worthy of a separate presentation, which I'm sure Adam and the team would be willing to facilitate at some point. But if we look outwards, for the purpose of this evening, most of the money and the principles at the moment are coming through combined authorities. And the combined authorities, of which in the north at present there are 6. And in practice, and this is from the Local Government Association, believe it or not, combined authorities are plain English guide, which is sometimes what I need, definitely. So in practice, they have economic development, regeneration and transport as their core functions, and are underpinned by local democracy, the Economic Development and Construction Act 2008 and the Transport Act 2008. So as you can see, they are in a pivotal position for unlocking the north and also unlocking and facilitating some of the very good schemes and concepts that we've just seen previously presented. I mean, for example, we know that WICA in the north, the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, it's on everyone's radar at the moment. They've been challenged and tasked with delivering 2 new railway stations in West Yorkshire. And by definition and default, that they are the custodians of the transport and infrastructure required to unlock the north, basically. So we need to see how all that works. Principally, the route to engagement is through frameworks. At some point, these authorities need to engage with the supply chain in our varying sizes and shapes. And the framework is, I won't go in when we won't open up the whole realm of the frameworks, legals and concepts, but just as a framework, as a delivery vehicle. So the delivery vehicle, and you can see maybe from the pictures that are on your screen at the moment, once a framework comes out, I mean, a framework from a pragmatic perspective is it finance directors, I mean, the first thing a finance director will say, or your accounts team, is how little are we going to do that for? Because we're all guilty of buying these frameworks for whatever way, shape or reason that we need. And then our legal people exclaiming, well, I mean, they want unlimited what? We buying it at at net cost, and when we're doing it at risk. And the word for some, really, it's critical. We must get on these frameworks, and there's that self-generating enthusiasm without really looking at the whys and wherefores of what the framework is, but more fundamentally, the work profile behind the framework. And then we're taken to our delivery teams. I mean, we all struggle, particularly from our side, is what exactly is it they want us to do? And consequentially, almost always, is that they'll never be able to do that work in time. So the framework element of engaging with the supply chain is a difficult and maybe not the best suited concept, because the size of the size of some of the projects that are sat behind certain combined authorities, they are huge infrastructure projects, and they cannot really be delivered succinctly and efficiently and effectively by almost a fractionalized approach to engagement of the varying design and delivery components. It needs to be looked at holistically, and maybe at that level, having seen the three presentations that have been in circulation, that is also the time to incorporate these concepts into the actual delivery model, rather than coming in when the delivery model's already been set. So just to try and provoke or engender some conversation and thought, to actually unlock the North and maybe thereby help deliver the concepts and the great work that you guys have been presenting earlier on this evening. We all go to varying supply chain events and suppliers events that are hosted by varying authorities, and in essence, it's sometimes the presentation of stuff that you already know, stuff that we're already aware of. And so in essence, why don't we just look at unlocking the North by adopting a joint delivery group approach? We've recently and still are just coming to the end of a delivery group approach for the Transport for London on the major scheme I mentioned earlier on. And that was because they went to market on a particularly large scheme, the four-line modernisation programme. But they engaged the supply chain very, very early and directly. It was done through a competitive tender, and the whole process of that unlocked a massive project and created efficiencies in the project. Or do we, again, as we present in this evening, almost present a pain gain approach and take cohesive responsibility for delivering successful infrastructure projects? We always talk and profess to have collaboration, but except when it comes to taking a collaborative approach to picking up big projects and taking the North as a whole and not just as an individual organisation. That probably sounds almost utopian, but if we don't start looking at it from a different perspective, then we're not going to deliver much, really. Or do we go back to the combined authorities, just using these as the example, at strategy level, and set their expectations openly with them and show them the good stuff that can be done, but also show them and educate them in the ways of delivering massive infrastructure projects. So not a lot of people have done this in terms of delivery. There are very few in the supply chain in terms of construction that have actually delivered them. But unless we start looking at it from a combined view, then we are going to struggle. Do we even broach a steering group or think tank type environment to test these options? So maybe on an evening we just have representatives from different disciplines, even just looking at how we can engage with ourselves more fully and thereby sell and engage a different type of product and delivery model back to the authorities where the funding sits. I think, again, just going back to the issue of education, the authorities themselves, they have been challenged and now they've been tasked with delivering some significant amounts of work. But the way we communicate and engage between themselves and between us maybe needs a coat of looking at to make it more efficient and effective. And then the ultimate kick out, I suppose, is the use of the frameworks, presenting a fractionalized supply chain with no common goal for the North, because we all look at it in our own piecemeal households. I mean, I've just watched 3 presentations that show combinations of environmental, carbon friendly, bringing everything together in terms of a project, except ourselves. We probably do need to look at of how we can take more leadership in the delivery of unlocking the North, basically, and some of the significant schemes that are definitely coming to the fore. I mean, we've got Network Rail as a major key stakeholder across all of the region with some, if not most, of these projects in one way or another. There's the schemes that are delivered that have the consequential effects of the urban regeneration in and around station developments. All of these have spin-off effects into it, but into the varying strategies and delivery model or delivery that you guys have just been presenting on. So in essence, it is a bit, like I say, maybe utopian, but I think it's something we need to start to address, because the longer we leave it, the North will not go any further, really. So that was me, Adam. I'm afraid, short and sharp. So
that was great. Yeah, cheers. I mean, when we were talking about this before, it was nice that you, as soon as I asked you, you just straight away challenged it, which was always good. It's always good to say, do we actually need a key? Does it need unlocking? But I think
it does, and sort of I felt I've almost, I mean, sat and listening to the rest of the presentations, you can see that the amount of great work and the expertise and the diversity of expertise and forward thinking that people are putting into engineering and design, when in fact we also need that level of forward thinking and deliver and not engineering, but forward thinking in how we're actually going to deliver this design. And if one of the blocks is that we need to look at the mode and operation of how we get into engagement with these people, well, that's going to be obviously the first starting point. Otherwise, we won't end up delivering anything, really. So
yeah, no, definitely. Right, thanks for that, everybody. So we're just gonna open it up to the floor. I've got a few questions that we've got coming through, so I think there's probably about one each. We've got time for, so I'll just kind of point this at each one of you. So we've got a question for Stephen. The relationship between Kate Raworth's donut economics and the 20-minute neighbourhood is interesting. Have you explored the benefits of modelling a neighbourhood on her model and assessed the benefits?
Well, not yet. But it's a good challenge, and I think I personally have only really come across Kate Raworth's work in the last 6 or 7 months, so I'm playing catch up a little bit to try and fully understand how that might work. But there are other places, and actually there's a website that she runs, which is like a school or a group that explores these very specific points, and you can bring projects in and praise them under those principles. I think the acronym is DEAL, Donut Economics, something. But I think that would be a very interesting thing, because what the whole point about the donut economics is the regenerative quality of, and I think it was Ben that was talking about the life cycle of products and getting this virtuous circle of the consumption. And donut economics certainly aligns with that. So appraising projects on that basis, I think, would provide some helpful metrics to know what's working and what's not. So yeah, I think that'd be a really good idea. Haven't done it yet.
Right, cheers. So I'm gonna direct this one at Ben, but I think you could probably jump in as well, Stephen. So a key challenge with reclaiming streets for less car-based use is that the high street is generally in decline. What active frontage will replace the high street, or will in return, sorry, that doesn't make sense. A key challenge with reclaiming streets for less car-based use is that the high street is generally in decline. Yeah, what active frontage will replace the high street? Essentially.
Yeah. I mean, I think going back to the Altrincham model, We had a meeting at Planet, the landscape architects who were also involved in it, and they kind of showed me around. It was really interesting just to see how they were talking about how it's good to almost confuse drivers into not being sure whether it's a pedestrian or a car priority, and therefore there's a certain amount of care that the drivers will take through that space. In terms of frontage without retail, I mean, I guess if we look at Altrincham and the revival of Altrincham has been centered largely around the market and around food and beverage, I guess, and people aren't going out to shop as much, are they? People are going out to socially interact with one another, because everyone buys everything off Amazon now, right? So people don't go out shopping on a Saturday like they used to. So it's more about the social interaction and trying to knit a sense of community together. And that has happened largely around food and beverage, hasn't it, in Altrincham? Because when I was growing up, it was a bit of a ghost town when the Trafford Centre got built. So it has engendered that sense of community and just a focal point for people to gather and have some kind of human interaction, apart from the last 6 months when that hasn't happened. But
I think I'd add to that the certainly in our work, the experiential piece is a major driver of, yes, retail will be there, but you might be going to touch and feel. So a great example is if you walk into any Apple store, and I always advocate this for people, go into a big Apple store and just sit there for 20 minutes and watch what happens. Lots of people touching, feeling, playing, not that many people buying because they're buying from elsewhere, as Ben's just said, from Amazon, from Apple or wherever else. But the human part of touching, feeling, interacting, being social, intuitively feels like it won't go away, which leads us to some very different conclusions. And there's some great examples at the moment. John Lewis starting to turn some of their stores over to Resi, but it's John Lewis's Resi where it's their products that you're living in rental. So this blurring of what's Resi retail experience is all up for grabs, I think, in my view. And we'll see some very interesting hybrids coming.
Yeah, there was a term, I think it's brand embassies or something, that was around that idea of, it's the experience of what the product is, and then you go away and buy it. Okay, thanks for that. So the next one is Giles. Really interesting presentation, and would be good to understand more about model villages and how they relate to the railway infrastructure benefits for villages, especially on new or reopened railway lines such as Ashington, Blythe, or East West Rail.
Oh, good question. I'm just in parallel doing other things on exactly that question. So I think it's a really interesting one. So that example that I put up of Otterpool Park down in Kent is on HS1, high speed one. So it's 35 minutes into St. Pancras. So the rail becomes the anchor in terms of who lives there. And what's interesting about Otterpool Park is potentially it's quite a young audience. So you're starting to segment the audience based on that transport spur. So the sort of transit orientated development with a human centric approach, and back to earlier presentations, 20-minute, 15-minute city, etc., almost taking all those tools in the toolkit and then applying them to former industrial, brownfield, garden village, urban extension type environments around something like rail as mass transit or the tram. And you've seen what's hugely interesting, just have a flick through the rail announcements that's come out this evening from DFT. So the Bolton to Bury railway line is in there. Bury Haywood to Rochdale tram link is in there. Metrolink extension, countless other things of how railways could reinvigorate community. And I think taking that holistic view of how does mass transit fit with on-demand transit, with transit orientated development, with a 20-15-minute city, town, garden village, rural place, gets super interesting. None of it's rocket science, but kind of let's make a new set of ingredients or take the ingredients and make a new recipe.
That's really interesting. Yeah, it's a really sort of point. Actually, how do you apply those principles, and whether you need a new set of principles, or whether you can just kind of morph what you've already got.
Nothing's new. Nothing's new, really, is it? We all know that.
Cool. Okay, so the last question, just directed to Kevin. How do we enable a more joined-up approach to infrastructure? Personally, I don't understand why the value in joining HS2 with HS1 was not seen, so that you could get on a train in Manchester or Leeds and wake up in Paris or Brussels. Guess that's yeah. I'd direct that at Kevin, but I think it's kind of everybody can jump in.
I think from the joined up approach perspective is one of the things that that maybe need. We have combined authorities. There's 6 of them, and we have transport policies across the north, which are coming through from Transport for the North. But why don't we combine and have a combined authority for the north? So it's interesting, just thinking aloud from the great stuff that you guys have been presenting on, that to link all those strategies together, for me, is a common sense approach, and the benefits would be far wider ranging. Whereas if you try to present those and having to present them to 6 separate regional combined authorities, you're doing it 6 times, and their interpretation could be different. Whereas if we had one common body where you could present it holistically across the north, then it would have more. It'd have more not credibility, but it would definitely have more clout, and when we would look at all these infrastructure projects as a combined approach rather than looking at them as in individual schemes. So that may give a far easier point of contact.
I'm happy to wade into the HS2, HS1 thing, being a bit of a rail geek. Don't forget that originally when HS1 was designed, we did have the sleeper service that was scheduled from Manchester to run to Cologne. And I did see it on test in Piccadilly. It did exist. And there is one carriage of it left at Doncaster Station if you ever go through there. Why isn't HS2 joined up to HS1? Really great question. Just doesn't make sense in my terms. But if you look at what's happened across Europe, in advance of the pandemic with climate change, the rise of the sleeper network, the massive investment that's going on might not happen in near years, but I would fully expect the UK to get plugged into that network, given that there'd be so much pressure on not flying. So does it get to the point when actually the market starts to decide? And it's very interesting if you look at Northern Powerhouse Rail announcements and how that links in through the airport into Piccadilly and then on to Bradford, etc. That Transport for the North, going back to Kevin's point, just is actually exerting itself and saying, look, we want this to be better for the North in terms of that Liverpool, Warrington, Airport, Manchester, Bradford, Leeds and beyond set of services. So there's an interesting dynamic at play between air quality, climate change, political drive, etc., which might unblock some of that.
Right. Okay, we've just got one last question. I think I'm just going to ask, and I think it's probably directed at Stephen and Ben, but I think again everybody can jump in. So COVID-19 resulting in less travels to urban centres. Do they have any ideas on how to improve the efficiency of the urban experience so that the focus is on quality over quantity? I guess that's for everybody actually. Does anybody want to wade in first?
Well, I can offer a starting view while others gather their thoughts, but it kind of links back to I think the previous question that Ben was answering there also, which is what's the purpose of our urban centres? And I think there's large organisations, not least of which is the NHS, which is really waking up to what role it needs to play in society. And I think if you take Manchester, for example, you've got Wythenshawe and Wythenshawe Hospital, a centre of regional excellence, but actually it's in its own campus, quite detached and dislocated from the community that it serves. It would be really, really interesting to think about how the NHS as an anchor occupier could revitalise some of the spaces in town and city centres, and all of the ecosystem that then spins off from such a large organisation occupying a strategic place in the convergence of the networks that we've already got, surrounded by the hinterland of residential or community. So you're not having to, again, it kind of goes back to that point about accessing a lot more within shorter distances of where you live. So I do think that there's a lot of that is yet to play out. So I'm very, very hopeful of what the future may be, because at the end of the day, the networks that we live with in the main have evolved over centuries, and it's still, the integrity of those networks still exist. And all we need to do is find the right balance to make it much more attractive for people to experience those centers in a much more positive way.
Great. Has anybody else got anything they want to add before I move on to closing out? I think we're all good. No, great. Thanks for everybody's comments this evening. So I'm just going to do a few closing remarks. So on behalf of Western Wellington, I'd like to thank you all for your presentations and your contributions to the topics this evening. As we outlined earlier, we've kind of programmed this to be a quarterly event. So we want to bring this as a platform to sort of bring everybody together to a central forum for discussions sort of around the built environment and procurement and that kind of thing, which we've done this evening. So our next event will probably be sometime early in the next year, so we'll need to define that, but keep your eyes on your emails and on your calendars. Also, if you're interested in speaking, if anybody on the call today is interested in speaking or contributing or assisting with the next event, please come to speak to either myself or Sam or any other member of WW, and they'll put you in contact with us. We can't hold these events without people getting involved. So again, thanks to all the presenters today. Alternative, if you want to get in contact to our generator email, we've got an email that I will circulate at the end of the presentation. And we'll also circulate all the speakers' emails if they're happy for us to send them around for discussion. If anybody wants to get in contact to have a few conversations and continue the conversation and discussions that we've had today. So, so before everybody jumps offline and grabs themselves a glass of wine, which I'm probably going to do, I just want if you can all just join me in one last sort of silent round of applause, that'd be great. I'm going to do that. So thanks everybody. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye guys.
Cheers. Thanks, Cheers.